Somewhere in there, you've got to learn, all of us, there's a moment in that journey where the discernment of the heart is driven by the voice of God.
Here are the stories that remind us why people matter.
Hey, everyone, I'm Dean Sikes, and welcome to our YouMatter Podcast.
Hi, I'm Dean Sikes, host of YouMatter. Today's podcast is very special. We have the executive director of our ministry as our guest. Stay tuned. You don't want to miss this one. So let's go to the very beginning of your walk with God. When did you become a Christian? What was that like for you?
Yeah, that's a good question. So early on, when I was 4, I gave my life to the Lord. And I remember going up to my mom and saying, I don't even know what inspired this, but I went up to her and I said, I want to be a Christian. And I think it was the Lord working in my heart at a young age. And she was like, great, that's great. And she, obviously a Christian home, strong believing parents. And at the age of 4, I just said the sinner's prayer. And that sort of started me on, I would say, a walk with God that maybe was a little bit more religion-based, of doing the right things. I think I did have a tender heart for God, but I didn't really know God. And I did the right things, went to Awanas, memorized a lot of scripture. I wanted to be the best in Awanas. And I think there was one year I worked through 2 Awana books.
For those who don't know, what is Awana?
It's actually a Baptist Bible memorization tool that gets students to read through scripture and memorize scripture. So. And
you went through how many of those?
And I went through two Awana books. You're supposed to go through one. Anyways, so.
Always been an overachiever, have we?
I did the right things, and I think I had a tender heart towards God, but when I was 12, I really started doubting a lot of that. I got to the point where I knew about God, but I wasn't sure if he was real. I didn't know, how do I know if God actually exists? I don't know if Jesus ever was here. How do I know what truth is? And I know a lot of people struggle with that question of either how is God fair or is God real at some point in their life? But for me, I was 12. Right. And it forced me to ask these questions. And I just hit this point. I think some of it was the enemy saying, God's not real. This faith you have isn't true. But ultimately, God used that to get me to cement my faith into believing, okay, God is real. And if that's true, I need to make sure I know him. And when did that happen? When did that cementing process take place? It was through conversations with my mom. And I knew I believed specific lies, and I won't get into all that right now, but I got to the point where I realized, okay, based off of history, based off of the Bible's accuracy, based off of historical facts that Jesus actually was a person on the earth, and the Bible being truth, I can pretty much deduce, okay, God's real. And from that, it launched me into, okay, I'm choosing to believe this, but I have to know that I can have a personal relationship with Christ for myself. And that happened actually through a message I was listening to where I doubted, okay, if God's real, how do I know if I'm actually a child of God?
Saved.
And how do I know I'm saved? And that person said, make today the day where you can look back to and say, this was the day that I gave my life to Christ. And so right then, I think it was like May 10th, or I think it was May 10th when I was 14 years old. I was like, okay, God, I'm yours. I'm giving my life to you. And it was in that prayer, in that moment, that I really believe the Spirit just came into my life and started working and developing the relationship with Christ.
So for people, because I went through a similar thing where, I never stopped believing that there was God was real. Yeah. But I really wrestled with, am I saved?
Yes.
And I grew up in a really great Baptist church, had a great, Christian home. Traditional values were very present. But I can't tell you how many times on those Sunday morning services, I'd be sitting there going, am I saved? Am I saved? Yes. Am I saved? Yes. What do I do? Do I pray again? How many times do I pray this prayer?
Yes.
And I realized, maybe in the same slant, if you will, of relational development with the Lord, that mine was really based on am I good enough? Does my life count? Why would God save me? And I'm reminded that the children of Israel in the Old Testament saw what God did. Moses, the leader of the children of Israel, got to understand why God did it. He saw behind the curtain.
Yeah.
He had relationship. The Bible says that God spoke to Moses face to face as a man speaks to his friend. That's a pretty cool thing to be said about yourself. What's neat about you? Well, God speaks to you face to face as if you're actually his friend.
Yeah.
So when you at 14 began to have this trajectory change, your life, I would imagine, like all of ours, could have gone in one of 2 or 3 or 4 different directions.
Yeah.
Talk about that.
Yeah. So, what did happen with my life was immediately after, it's actually some pretty cool things happened where I look back and I'm like, wow, the grace of God was moving in my life. And it wasn't me doing it. It was him doing it. And a couple unique things happened. First, I fell in love with the Word. I would spend hours in the Bible. And I was homeschooled, so I grew up in a Christian home. But because of that, I didn't go to high school. We lived like miles from civilization out in the woods. And I didn't have many friends. So really, Christ became my friend in those years. And I would spend hours reading the Bible and praying. And I began to get convicted of sin. And I began to get a passion for telling people about Christ. And began to get a deep hunger for God. And so my life, the grace of God started working in my life. And one of the biggest parts of that was actually my dad. And so my dad, I was very thankful for him in my life. I remember there was one, I think it might have been that same summer, he came up to us kids individually, and he didn't confess details of sin,
Right.
but he shared, hey, I've struggled with these things and I've shared them with your mom. And I'm basically a broken person, and I want to share that with you, that I haven't done everything right. And because of his honesty and confession, he sort of created a culture of confession in our family where I felt safe to talk to him.
Well, that's so good.
And because he did that, it gave me the boldness, which I can get into a little bit later, to go up to him and share some things in my own life.
Right. You said something there, Joseph, that's very important. I think your dad created a culture that was safe.
Yes.
To be honest, basically.
Yes.
To be able to go, I'm not a perfect person.
Yes.
That a lot of people struggle with that safety environment of, if I share something that's going to make me look not so great, or if I let you into my weakness, then are you going to use that against me in a moment of heated argument or whatever?
Yeah.
Is it going to be are you going to weaponize my own words against me?
Yes.
And I think that's the difference between being a dad and a father. You've heard me say a lot of times that dads give you what you want, fathers give you what you need.
Yeah.
And it seems to me that your father was just that, someone who gave you what you truly need.
He was.
So as you progress through life, you're now walking with God. You're in this environment that's pretty, I would imagine, isolated and very protected world in which you grew up. At what point did you really begin to sense the knocking on the door of your heart that God was calling you into ministry?
That's a good question. It was actually around that same time.
So a lot happened in that moment.
Because I wanted to go into the military.
Because?
And my dad was in the military.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to go into the military. When that happened, I basically got to the point where I was like, I want to give everything up to you, God. And the biggest thing that I wanted to do was go into the military, because my dad was in the military. And when I was 14 and gave my life to the Lord, I just gave it up. I was like, Lord, I just want to serve you. And there was probably some immaturity and lack of wisdom in that. Like, I'm just going to not have a career and just follow the Lord. And
Right.
I don't know where I'm going with my life. I'm just going to pursue God.
Yep.
But one really crucial, going back to my dad, one really crucial thing was, because he created a culture of confession, I got to this point where there was a few things in my life I knew I needed to confess. And I remember my dad we lived on the river, and we had about an acre of lawn in the backyard, and my dad was sitting out in a folding chair by the river, and I was inside the house. And I don't know what came over me, but I knew I needed to confess some things that actually affected a few people in my life. And I remember I remember thinking I need to talk to my dad, and it was the scariest thing I ever did. Every step I took towards him felt like a million miles. And I finally got up to him and I was like, Dad, I need to confess these sins. And I thought I was going to be grounded for months. I was going to get in huge trouble. And he looked at me after I shared everything, and he said, "I'm proud of you." And hearing those words, "I'm proud of you," that changed my life, because once again, going back to creating that culture of being open and honest, he became that person. And a lot of people I hear on the road say, like, "I don't have somebody, I'm alone." And they feel that way legitimately because they don't have somebody to share with. But when you find that person who is there, you just don't know it.
Right.
That you can share with, like, "I'm not alone. I have these struggles. I need this help." And that person looks at you and says, "I'm proud of you and I'm not going to judge you." It changes your life.
It's a game changer.
And it really did change my life. So that created a trajectory of, really being set free from some things and empowered to, like, "Okay, Lord, here's my life. Use me with my life." And so it was probably around 14 when I just was going after the trajectory of ministry.
So when you do that, Joseph, and you get to a place where you've migrated from religion to relationship, which is a massive journey. You've got a father who's not only creating a culture, but living the culture and allowing his family to do the same, of open communication, honesty and assessment of life. You're now moving towards what you believe to be God's leading you into ministry. Somewhere in there, you've got to learn, all of us, there's a moment in that journey where the discernment of the heart is driven by the voice of God. You begin to hear God. And to say that, I already know there's going to be a gazillion people go, "Hear God? God doesn't still speak." Well, yes, he does. He does. And they go, "Well, I've never heard him." Well, yeah, you have. You may not recognize his voice, but, and it's not just, very rare is it the audible voice. But can you unpack a little bit what it was like for you to kind of dive into the relationship where you then began to know that you know, oh, that's God?
Yeah, that's a good question.
I've got 3 good questions so far. This is good.
For me, I remember, this is a funny story, and it's very foolish in the eyes of the world, or it's very seemingly inconsequential, but for me it was big. I remember the first time I think I ever heard the voice of God. I was in the backyard and I was about to move a picnic table for my mom, and I think I was around 14. And I was going to reach underneath it, grab it, and move it, and I just felt this sense that was like, "Don't reach underneath there." I was like, "Okay," and I looked, and there was this big spider. And in that moment, I was like, I heard this, I felt this, and this result happened. Maybe that's God. Maybe there's a connection there. And after that point, I began to sort of track this sense, this inner prompting with, like, do this, tell this to this person, maybe pray for somebody and encourage them in this way with, what is the fruit of that? And it became, because I was just wanted God, I began to really listen, and maybe even too much, like, go do this little thing or do this. So it began to control me maybe too much, but I began to discern over time, okay, I'm feeling this prompting, I'm hearing this voice, do this, and it's not audible, it's in my heart. And the fruit of hearing that and being obedient to it and stepping out resulted in, oh wow, because I spoke and encouraged this person, they shared, that's exactly what I needed to hear. And when that happens over and over again, you begin to associate that prompting with that. That's not just chance. That's not the enemy. That's not me, because I couldn't have known that. Okay, this is probably the voice of God. And I think for all of us, the reason a lot of people don't hear his voice is because maybe we're too busy, so we don't stop and listen. But then I think sometimes he requires us to be obedient with what we hear. And we have to go step out and say, okay, I'm gonna obey. And really only on the other side of obedience do you truly understand, oh, that was God.
I say it this way, God tests obedience. The devil tests faith. And when you have the obedience that's operating in our lives and you're doing what you believe God's instructing you to do, therein lies the qualifier to hear more. I don't think we're going to hear the next instruction from the Lord until we successfully accomplish the last thing He instructed us to do, right? Because God is very intentional, and He's a God of order. And so as you're moving through, you're finishing up school, you're not going towards the military at this point. Now you have a pretty good idea that it is ministry. You're tracking with the Lord. First ministry experience for you that you can recall. First time you went, wow, I just did this, and this is my life. This is where I'm heading.
I think it was praying for people at the altar. And this goes back to, pastors and fathers and people in your life who can pour into you. My pastor let me be on the prayer team at church.
At a young age?
From 14, 14 on. And he let me pray for people. And I remember I'd go up to the altar as this 14-year-old and just be standing there waiting for someone to come up to me. And I would pray for them, and you just be praying for this person, and then all of a sudden you'd feel like the sweet presence of Jesus come, and you just see them start crying. And there's something about being the hands and feet of Christ for a person, being someone who can stand in the place of Christ to touch someone's life, that changes you, and it's not about. It can become about power. Ooh, I want to pray for this person and have the power of God flow through me. And there can be a good heart posture and probably a bad one in that. But to be used by Christ to touch someone's life and make an impact on their life, it really impacted my heart. And I remember I was actually part of the call of God on my life, I would say, is I decided one day to go into the woods and pray. And I went out into the woods for like 2 hours, and I sat on a log and I was just praying. And speaking of hearing the voice of God, I heard in my spirit, not audibly, but I heard His voice say, I've called you, I'm going to try to remember this, but He said, I've called you to raise up sons and daughters who will march to Zion. And I was like, march to Zion. And I knew immediately the Lord was saying, who will be a part of bringing the kingdom of heaven to earth.
Wow.
And I knew in that moment, somewhere in my life, God was going to use me to be a part of equipping a generation, an army of young people to follow God and bring His kingdom to earth. And
so
that stuck with me.
Yeah, and with that, when you know what you're called to do, and you have this concrete, evidential moment where you just go, I can timestamp it. That's when it happened for me.
Yeah.
It sets the course of the remainder of your life, really, because the calling doesn't change. So let's move forward. You go to Lee University. You end up graduating. You get a master's degree. You coach a track team at the collegiate level. But then you end up from there in Orlando, Florida.
Yes.
What was that like? And tell us what a little disclosure here, and I haven't said this yet, but might as well tell everybody now. Joseph is the executive director of our ministry. And so we've been having these conversations for some time now about just the right time to have Joseph come on and share his story with us. So the reason I know so much about you is we do life together. Yeah. So let's go to Orlando. Yeah. What were you doing? What was it like before you got that phone call that would forever change your life?
What you did. Well, interesting story. I was coaching track and field, just going back to why I ended up in Orlando, coaching track and field, coaching pole vault, which I was very uncomfortable with. And I sort of just got burned out, to be honest. I was doing something I was uncomfortable with. It was tough, it was hard. And I think the Lord was shaking my life and saying, okay, I'm gonna get you out of this place. I'm putting you somewhere new. And so in February of 2021, I told the head coach I'm out, I'm leaving. And I had no idea what I was doing. And through a series of events of once again going back to the voice of God, I was actually in my room and I thought back to a book I had read 10 years earlier, and it was Living a Life of Fire by Reinhard Bonnke. And I thought back to that book, it just popped in my head. And when I thought of that book, all of a sudden I felt the presence of God fall into the room, like heavy. I was like, what is going on here? And that happened, I think, 6 or 7 times where I thought of that book and the presence of God. And I actually shared that with one of my roommates. And he said, did you know that his successor, Daniel Kalenda, has a evangelism training school? I was like, no. He was like, yeah, they're bringing in people and they're training them up as evangelists and sending them out. And I was like, maybe I need to look into that school. And so through that, I ended up down there. And so it was a group of about 120, just crazy, on fire evangelists. And I love evangelism, and maybe there's some type of evangelism call on my life.
Right.
But these guys were full like evangelists, like
Yeah.
crazy
Real
guys. And so I got to hang out with all of them for about 3-4 months, where we got trained in really crusade evangelism, which was how do you bring together a mass group of people, equip the church in a certain city, bring 50, 60 churches together, go out on the field, get a bunch like 50,000, 60,000 people together and preach the gospel to them and see signs, see wonders, share the gospel, and then ultimately plug all these people back into the church. So that was sort of the mission and vision of the boot camp. And so it was an awesome time. I knew through that, like, I don't think I'm called to go overseas and do crusade evangelism, but it forever stamped in me a heart for how can we get as many people saved as possible? How can we, as a church, be more effective? And really what God's doing down there is powerful.
Yeah, it is.
In bringing many people into the kingdom.
I remember that our ministry was in a season where we were having some shifting, some changing of people who'd been, one of whom had been with me for a long, long time, and the Lord had just called him out to go. He was actually getting married. His first wife had gone to heaven, and so he was moving on, and I was in this transitional time, and so what do? I go to the Lord, because my belief is God knows everything about everyone, about every situation, so why would I try to figure this out myself? Let me bring it to the Lord. So I did. And I said, Lord, you know what we need. You know who this person is. You know where this person is. And I don't know any of the answers to those, but you know it all. So I'm going to trust you. And I prayed, and I prayed the way I know to pray. I went into the realm of the Spirit of God, and I prayed aggressively. And then I got quiet, because I believe a massive part of prayer is being quiet, because again, he knows it all.
Yeah.
And in that quietness, I got an instruction, going back to hearing the voice of God. And he spoke very clear to my heart. I've only heard his audible voice one time. Today's not the day to get into that, but I knew in my heart the direction.
Yeah.
This is the way, walk in it. And he told me who to call. I mean, instantly. You ever had a name just pop into your heart, into your head, and you know that's it? That's what God does. And so I called this person. His name is Rob, and I go, Rob, hey Dean, how you doing? Doing great. Went through my whole little story. I said, here's what I'm looking for. And the Lord told me to call you. Now, Rob's in full-time ministry, knows the voice of God. And he goes, you're not going to believe, but you're the third person in 2 weeks who has called me with the same basic request. I said, well, the Lord told me. I said, would you go pray? He goes, yeah, sure I will. 2 days later, Rob calls me. And my request was, hey, Rob, I'm looking for someone, and here are the qualifications I'm looking for, and here's the responsibilities that they're going to fill, and I believe they're within your purview of that. You're going to know who this person is. Now, that takes either a lot of stupidity or a lot of courageous guts to make that kind of phone call, right?
Yeah.
2 days later, he goes, his first sentence was, you're not going to believe this, to which I responded, I absolutely am going to believe this, because the Lord told me to call you. I said, who is he? I said, I got him. I got the guy. I know exactly who he is. And he made an introduction. You and I talked actually later that day. And for the next 6 weeks, we talked. Yeah. I have never taken that long to hire anyone in 3+ decades of ministry. And we flew you into to Mississippi. And here was my theory, my strategy, my thought. If you can survive the next 3 days, you're the guy. Because the next 3 days are going to wear you out at a level of which this is. I'd done a convention one night, done a church the next morning, done a teen challenge that night, did multiple schools the next day. You were flying back. Yeah. And when it was over, you knew and I knew. Yeah. This is what's supposed to happen. Yeah. And as you have grown through the years now, came in as a personal assistant, then a road manager. now executive director of the ministry. What's that journey been like from your perspective, absent me sitting here, of course, in this conversation?
Yeah. Well, I have to go back to that initial call, because I remember I was working part-time for CFAN and once again wrestling. Okay, what am I doing now? And just working in the office, and a buddy of mine came in and he said, "Hey, I've got somebody that Rob wants to talk to you." I was like, "He wants you to come to his office." So I was like, "Okay." So I go down the hall. I've never talked to Rob once in my life, and he says, "You won't believe what just happened." He said, "This guy named Dean called me, and he said, I'm looking for my next personal assistant." And he looked at me and he said, "You're the guy." And I was like, "I've never talked to you before once in my life. What is happening? I don't even know if I trust this dude.
Right.
Like, does he even hear from God? What's going on?" And long story short, I get on the phone with you and we talk. But it was such a cool God moment where God literally, like through Rob, reached down, picked me up out of Orlando. Thank the Lord. Not to offend anybody from Orlando watching, but Tennessee's awesome. And put me back in Tennessee.
Yeah.
Where, like, I'm literally living right now 10 minutes from where I went to school. And I actually hated it in Cleveland. I grew to hate it. And then I moved to Orlando.
And they come back and they love it.
And then I grew to hate it. But then I came back to Cleveland and I fell in love with it. And there was such a grace of God on my life to come back. Met my wife back here. I mean, the Lord's just was so sovereignly and just moved me back. It's awesome. But yeah, this journey, I mean, it's been amazing. I remember that first weekend was tough, but I knew in my heart, this is what God has for me. He spoke to me in that process as well, because I had to hear from God too.
Sure you did.
And I remember one day I was on a walk, and this is just sort of how the Lord confirms big moment decisions for me, but I was praying and walking, and I don't know if I've ever shared this with you, but it was, I thought of either I think it was Genesis 50. And it said Joseph served in Pharaoh's court for a certain amount of time. And I remember the Lord spoke to me and he said, as Joseph served Pharaoh, I'm going to have you serve Dean. And right when I heard that, I was on a sidewalk, I'll never forget it. And once again, the presence of God fell on me so strong in a sidewalk in a neighborhood that I literally fell to my knees.
Wow.
And the Lord has to do stuff like that, I think, for me, because I'm pretty stubborn. And so maybe he just has to use that, or maybe he just loves me.
I mean, I think that's
But he loves all of us.
He loves us
and he
all.
wants to meet all of us.
But he always meets us where we are.
And yeah, and that's where I was. I needed that.
Yeah. He meets us where we are, and then he leads us to where he wants us to be.
Yeah.
And so now, in coming full circle to, you go to the woods as a kid to pray. You're sitting out in the woods. You hear this is what you're called to do.
Yeah.
Raise up sons and daughters to
march to Zion, which is a weird, but
yeah, but I get it.
Yeah.
Come forward all these, literally a couple of decades later, and you help every day raise up sons and daughters, have an impactful moment with God to what we do. Yeah. And so I think from someone who leads a ministry, I look at this and I go, there are all necessary ingredients in life. The people that are never seen on a camera, never seen on screens, never seen on whatever, never seen on a stage. Those people doing what they do every day allow people like, I guess, me, who do what I do every day, the more visible side of this, to have that effectiveness. Without you, or the people in media, or the people on the road, or people in aviation, or people in prayer, all the scheduling, all the components that make this ministry what it is, each person plays such a vital role. Yeah. And, we'll probably got a few minutes left before we close up, but maybe today you could talk just a minute about what it's like to have the fulfillment of what you do versus you went to Orlando maybe thinking you're going to go be an international evangelist. But maybe, just maybe, God had to get you to Orlando to be able to then hear in a way that would be so confirming to then bring you back here to allow you to do what you do every day in running an organization. Talk about just the experience of the value of hearing God as it relates to growing up 4 years old, 14 years old, culture of truthfulness, confession, walk out in the woods, drop to your knees. Bring it all together for us.
Yeah, well, I mean, it is truly an honor to be able to, first of all, be a part of an organization that's impacting teens. Back to what you were talking about, I heard you're supposed to raise up sons and daughters to impact the kingdom of heaven. And so for working at YouMatter, I have sort of a unique seat where I get to see what everybody does every day. I get to see what you do every day. I get to see the behind the scenes of why you make the decisions you make, of why we go where we go. And I think I just have to hit on this. One of the biggest things I love about YouMatter is we go to the places where people can't give us anything back. We're not looking for anything from teens. Right. And we're going to places where, when you go to a prison, when you go to a teen challenge center, you're reaching people that maybe never have heard this message that YouMatter before. Going into a public school, you get to speak into the lives of all these teens. And so, first of all, from that perspective, the fulfillment aspect, it's awesome, because to me, it's all about being a part of what God's doing on the earth, And what is he he cares about orphans. He cares about widows. He cares about the poor. And he cares about teens who don't have a father in their life, who don't have parents. So many of the teens that are contemplating suicide is because they don't have the father in their life. They don't have that voice, or they don't have somebody in their life. And if we're able to come by and say, I'm someone, you do matter, your life isn't worth taking right now, you got something to live for, that's just an honor to be a part of that. And so I think, but going back to my life, is it all comes down to the fact that we can hear from God. We can hear his voice, and it's so easy to get jaded because you heard wrong. It's so easy to get jaded because you're like, I don't know, maybe I just need to read the Bible, and you do, and you can hear his voice from the Word. But he is the Word. The Word points to the one who wants to speak to you through the Word, through other people, through his voice. But we need to get back to that place of relationship, because Christianity is all about relationship. It's not just about knowing the Word, it's about knowing him, and he wants to speak to us.
That's the takeaway. It's about knowing him because he really wants to speak with us. One of the things that I like to do at the end of these moments is offer you something. And I've written a book, and it's called YouMatter, Finding Hope and Meaning in Everyday Life. And I want to give it to you. And there'll be a way that you'll see on the screen. You can get your copy. Tens of thousands of people have gotten this book, and I want you to have yours. Remember, God loves you. He's got a plan for your life. And because you're breathing, you matter.